welcome back to Mountain Minds Monday, a program of Tahoe Silicon Mountain, and thanks for joining us for this main part of the event. Before I introduce our speaker, I want to give a huge thank you to our sponsors. I'll introduce Dick Schulte, who's here from Holland & Hart. They are our gold sponsor, to talk about them for a bit.
Thank you. Holland & Hart is a full-service law firm. Our home office is in Denver. We have over 500 lawyers, and we do almost every kind of legal service you might need. We have three offices in Nevada, Reno, Las Vegas, and Carson City. And I do intellectual property, so I'm in the patents group at Holland & Hart. Electronic patents, mechanical patents, copyrights, and also trademarks. And not every business needs a patent attorney, although certainly quite a few do. But every business has a trademark. So there's potentially service that we can be to most anybody who has a trademark they use in their business. And I'd be glad to talk with you about any of those things.
Thank you, Dick, and we really appreciate the support of Holland & Hart. Our silver sponsor for tonight is Mobile Law. They have offices in Truckee, Reno, Sacramento, and Incline Village, and they represent clients in business law, construction law, estate planning, family law, intellectual property, real estate, and bankruptcy. And then, of course, we have our community partners listed on the slide, the Chamber, Truckee Tahoe Community TV right here, the Lift Co-working, and our venue here tonight, Pizza on the Hill. If you're wondering how to become a sponsor, you can always talk to me or use the link on this slide here. And we also, in addition to our corporate sponsors, have individual sponsors. You probably heard about that when you checked in, but if you're on the live stream, you can become one for $150 a year. You can sign up at this link shown, and what it gets you is entry to all of our Mountain Minds Monday events, the pizza and salad at these events, plus you get a drink ticket that gets you a beer, a wine, or 2 sodas, and then you don't have to wait in line for check-in. You get a nice short check-in line, so it's a really good price and a really good way to support us and the live stream and the organization in general. So you can use that link up there. And now I am so excited to introduce our speaker, Kim Bateman. So her talk tonight is Dialogues with the Digital Dead, Technology and Bereavement, and I'll tell you a little bit about her. Dr. Bateman's research interests include organizational psychology, bereavement, and humor, and she has delivered many notable keynote addresses, including There's a Fox Under My Bed and Pixie Dust in My Hair at the Developmental Psychology Conference, The Psychology of Humor at the Women's Wellness Conference, and College Culture through the Song Lyrics of Bob Marley at the Community College League of California Conference. She presented a TEDx talk called Singing Over Bones, and is the author of a book on the same subject called Crossing the Owl's Bridge, a guide for grieving people who still love. Dr. Bateman serves as the executive dean at the Tahoe-Truckee campus of Sierra College, and I hear she makes a mean banana pudding. Cream pie. Oh, gosh. Thank you so much.
I hear you. Oh. Am I on? You're on. I'm on. Slide. I'm trying to figure out where I can stand. Now, Garrett implored me to keep this. Hold on. I really have to figure out where I can move and where I can. Okay. Am I good? Still good? All right. Garrett implored me to keep this topic light. So I'm going to start with the only joke I know about death and dying. There's the turn of the century, and a man is laying on his deathbed, a poet. And the priest comes, and he's giving last rites, and he says, "My son, do you accept Jesus Christ as your personal Lord and Savior?" And he says, "Yes, yes, Father, I do, I do." And he says, "And do you also renounce Satan?" And he says, "Oh, Father, I don't think this is the time to be making any enemies." He dies. I'm going to start with 3 quotes. I want you to see if any of these quotes resonate with you in your experience of loss. The first one is, Your absence has gone through me like thread through a needle. Everything I do is stitched with its colors. How many of you relate to that? The second one is, though the grave site might seem a place where we say goodbye to our beloved dead, it is also a place where we have the opportunity to greet them as need be. How many of you feel anything about that one? Third one is, my barn having burned to the ground, I can now see the moon. Ready? And what's the theme that connects all three of those quotes? This is an interactive. So, theme that connects all three of those quotes. Brian. Yeah, so there's this idea that there is sort of this new presence in absence. So presence and absence becomes the theme. So just a little bit of background. I got into this field because my brother, who was 21 years old, died in an avalanche while extreme skiing at Alhambra, right outside in Munchkin Shoes. And that started a whole kind of avalanche in my family. And my father, who's very stoic Norwegian, his response was, well, 3 out of 3 people die, so shut up and do it. And my mother has been crying for over 20 years. Can't say my brother's name without her becoming very, very emotional. And so I knew that I had to find my own way through. And it was actually that one quote, my barn having burned to the ground, I can now see the moon, that opens me up to a whole new way of thinking about grief work. And that is as a very creative process, as letting go of the physical being an opportunity to say hello in the imaginable. So I became really, really interested in the stories of how people had creatively navigated through grief. And so it is a very, very old, 30,000 generations of human history have tried to communicate with the dead or are waiting for messages from the dead. The Maoris looked in drops of blood to see the faces of the deceased. The Egyptians looked in blobs of ink. The Siberians looked in copper mirrors. And then people looked in bowls of water that quantities appeared. There's the oracles of Delphi. There's the Taj Mahal. People for generations and generations have been trying to cross the space of the living and the dead. This one right here is in Japan, and it's called the Phone of the Wind. Anyone heard of this one? Scott, do you want to tell everybody what the people do here? Yeah, so people line up, and it's an old rotary phone, and people will line up, especially after the tsunamis, and go right in there and talk to their dead loved ones. And whether they receive a response is, it doesn't matter if it's satisfying and it feels good, right? Doesn't go to the machine. It's a rotary phone. So part of what I've done as a clinical psychologist, I've tried to help people really organically figure their own symbols and their own ways through grief. So for instance, I worked with a 6-year-old girl whose mom died of breast cancer. And her father was very checked out because he was in his own grief and he was raising 2 small children on his own. And so in talking to her, I said, tell me about your mother. What is she like? And she was like, Mama loves tea. So she came up with this idea that every Sunday she would set up a tea party where she would sit across from an empty cup and pour her mother a cup of tea and she would talk to her. There are all kinds of really creative ways through. I mean, we even had a local woman here whose 18-month-old son died. What's that road that goes right out onto 89, where it's really hard to see where you're supposed to stop? Alder Creek. And she went, the nanny went right out into the middle. The car was hit. The baby was thrown from the car seat, and about a month later, after he had died, she read the sheriff's report that said that an unsecured car seat may have contributed to the fatality. And some of you may know this woman. She set up car seat checkpoints in our town. And she said that every time she got her bony little knee in there and she was pulling and prying and tugging on that seatbelt, it felt like she was loving Luke. It was a very physical way for her to keep in connection with her child. Another man in the Midwest, the day his wife died, he started planting trees, and people didn't even notice for 20 years later that he was building this heart in tribute to his deceased wife. This is a story of a young man from Reno. He was 16 years old and he was in a quad accident at Sand Mountain. He was on life support. He had no brain activity, and the father was a musician, the mom was a nurse, and they came in to do the whole talk about organ donation. And when they got to the part about the heart, the man was very upset, and he said, the heartbeat was my first introduction to the fact that I was going to be a father on the sonogram, and it's really a hard thing to let go of. And what he ended up doing was he hooked up a stethoscope with a recorder. He recorded his son's heartbeat, and then he composed over 28 different musical pieces using his son's heartbeat as the bass. Very creative. And he says it brings him a lot of comfort. This story is one of a woman who lost her husband after 65 years, and he had been the one to drive all the time. So she started taking the bus everywhere, and she was freezing cold, and she was kind of shuffling around. And she noticed that wherever she was at the bus stop, she would see single gloves lying all over the place. And there was something about seeing that single glove that reminded her of herself, because she felt fairly useless without her partner. And so she started picking up these gloves and shoving them in her coat, and she would take them home, and she would stick them in her husband's dresser until the dresser overflowed. And then in the springtime, she went out in the tree in their backyard, and she hung each of those gloves by fishing line in the tree, and there were hundreds of them. And she said that when the wind blows, it's like they're waving goodbye and waving hello. There was one story about a man with terminal cancer who arranged for the delivery of a golden retriever puppy 2 months after his death. And it arrived from the Humane Society on the doorstep to his wife with a note that said, "Love him for the both of us." So we have this desire to stay in connection, because when someone dies, we don't stop loving. We just look for new ways to keep loving. So I'm going to set this up, because in a minute we're going to be talking about some really creative things people are doing using technology to bridge this space between the living and the dead. So I'm going to actually tell you a folk tale. It's from the Pacific Northwest, and then we're actually going to talk a little bit about this folk tale and what the applications are in terms of the work of grief and how we stay in connection with the deceased. And the story is called Nictia. It takes about 3 or 4 minutes to tell. Few people had seen her by the light of the full moon, but those who had said she was as wide as she was tall. And she had feet more like roots going into the ground, and hands that were more like talons than fingers. She had greasy gray matted hair that was held up with vulture feathers. Her eyes were wide and fairly fixed in their sockets, and her breath was mossy. And the sounds she made were more bird-like than human. Chee-chee-caw, chee-chee-caw. And she was followed closely by birds who hoped she would know them. They called her Nictia, which means of the night. And she lived in the hollowed out burl of redwood trees that had been hit by lightning. And it was there she collected the treasures of the forest, the lichen, the fox fur, the snail shells, the mushrooms. But the most coveted treasures of all were the bones of owls that had been taken too soon. And so she would spend her nights foraging through the forest, picking up little bones, light as a grain of rice, translucent but strong as the wind, the feathers, the talons, the beaks. And when she had collected all the pieces of a particular bird, she went back to her home and she sat quietly beside the image, thinking in that moment of the particularness of that bird. And in that quiet moment, she could feel her heartbeat, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And she'd listen to her breath going in and out and in and out, ba-boom, ba-boom, ba-boom. And that beat gave rise to a song, perhaps na 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 na, or flesh, 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 flesh. And she would piece by piece by piece put each of that bird's bones as back in order as a bird's bones should be. And then she would scoop the clay from the creeks and she would build that body of that bird. And if it dried too quickly, she would use the saltwater truth of her tears to remold it. Then she'd stick the feathers back in, ba-boom, 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 na, 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 na. And she'd sing. She'd sing that heartbeat back to life. She'd sing that flesh into wholeness. She'd sing that bird back into being until she finished her song, and that bird would open its yellow-green eyes, spread its wings, fly out of the cave, equipped now to cross the Owl's Bridge to the next place, leaving nothing but its memory and a few feathers in the dank, wet air. So I want you to take about a minute, talk to the person across from you about what does this story have to do with what we have to do when we're bereaved. What does it have to do? Take 1 minute. Bring us back, Adrian. We're going to bring it back. And I'm going to actually repeat what you say because we're streaming. So, Ron, what did you guys talk about?
We were talking about kind of building it up so you can say goodbye to it because you didn't get to say goodbye.
Okay, so we have to reform or create a new integrity before we can actually say goodbye.
Right.
Okay? Dean, what were you guys talking about? Were you in the same group?
Yeah. Well, we were over here. So we were talking about how just, that you had to figure out a way to release it.
Okay.
In some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Whether how you processed it or whether how you built it up or whether you gave it a place to then be able to move forward.
And it's interesting because it has to be recreated before it can move, right? How about you guys? What were you talking about?
So we talked about how it took time to assimilate both the bones as well as the thoughts and the memories.
Okay. And you're gathering. So Does anyone have any sort of description of what we do when we're gathering bones, kind of recreating a lost loved one? Brian, I heard you guys talking over there. Do you want to add? Rob, would you hand that to?
I've heard your TED Talk as well. So
yeah.
The gathering of artifacts and memories and stories as assembling this really vivid image and this relationship of love that you continue to have, and from there the opportunity to then transform it in the story here of crossing over into another life.
Yeah. So there is something where we gather, and we all do this. Like, my brother had a pin that said, "Just visiting this planet." We all wanted to wear his clothing. We wanted to listen to his music. We wanted to drive his baby blue VW van. We all of a sudden were going to Grateful Dead concerts because that was the way to relive and to piece together my brother and carve out a place in our cultural imagination for him, because we need to make him an integrity before we can allow him to transform. And that's the work of grief. Other thoughts? Anything else come up for you at the tables that we haven't talked about? Ed and Jay, what were you guys talking about? Something else?
I would just say, unfortunately, I'll just speak for myself, trouble connecting based on personal beliefs.
Okay.
Focused on
Great.
memory was the key. Not trying to recreate or connect, but certainly see
that would be useful for some people.
Of that story.
Yeah. Okay. Anyone else in the back, or what you guys are talking about? Okay. So that brings us to the next piece, which is, for 30,000 generations of human history, we have been dealing with grief through our own imaginations, whether it be through the religious stories that we believe in, or the things that we create for ourselves, whether we believe in angels, whether we believe in afterlife, and that has been on our own imaginations. And now we are on the precipice of a new wave of technology that's going to change this. So if you could summon up a three-dimensional holographic image with a chat box based on the digital footprint and actual deceased voice of the beloved deceased person, would you do it? Would you do it once? Would you do it more than once? Would you never do it? How many of you say, I would never do it, just as the first thing? How many of you say, you know, once would be kind of fun? Once would be kind of fun? How about, like, hey, I would like to be doing this over and over and over? Anybody? Couple? All right, so we have a full spread here. So let me tell you a little bit about this technology. The media has embraced this. Oops, I'm having a hard time. How do I click on that? Just that. The media has embraced this for many years. How many of you are familiar with Black Mirror? So there's an episode where a woman loses her husband, and they make basically an android of him that has artificial intelligence that's programmed to talk and react in real time, just like he is. Oops. No, it doesn't like my. It wants to spell check me. There we go. Oh, it's muted there. So this is a final scene in it where she has sort of enjoyed his presence, but then this is the ending of this particular episode. Oh. Oops. You know, it's okay. I can just tell you that she is feeling the emptiness of this relationship, and so she ends up telling him to, oh, there we go. So part of the reason I wanted to show you that is because you can see how he adapts to what she's saying. So he's trying to stay in the historical person that her husband was, and he's programmed to do that. And so when she says, go ahead and jump, he's like, okay. Oh, this isn't it. Yeah, this isn't it. We can go to the next slide even. And she says that, you know, that wouldn't be like my husband. My husband would be upset. He would start crying. He would, you know, he would have, and then you see how he goes right into those feelings. And that's the whole idea with these holograms, is that they would have, we're going to skip the ghost. Let's do the Supergirl one. Stop. Yeah, let's stop. And then if we could go back to my slides. So this effort to make these holographic images of the deceased are actually happening at MIT Media Lab right now. What they have done is they have combined a bunch of technology. The University of Washington has a big project called Megaface, which, and I'll show you a picture of that in just a second, where if you even just turn in a video of your loved one, they mark 20,000 different points on the face, and they can actually recreate that person's expressions and the movements. You combine that with the USC Institute for Creative Technology, and they're doing a lot of the voice recognition stuff. The Edinburgh Center is also doing the voice recognition stuff. So if you have a video clip that has voice plus the vision, they can actually look at the digital footprint. So all the texts, all the emails, anything that's written, anything they've put on Facebook, and they, you know, run the algorithms of what would this person say in these situations, and then they program them to be able to answer you in real time. Again, we're familiar with this through the Star Wars series with Yoda, who reappears. This is to show you kind of how realistic it is. And you know what, I'm not sure if I can show this, because let me just show, I'll show the part before he actually starts speaking. Because Tupac, yeah. No, because he curses a lot. Oh. Yeah. So this is an actual concert at Coachella using holographic imagery. So they took the video of him, and they have him on stage walking out. And you can shut it now. Shut it. Thank you. Yeah.
I was there.
You were there? How was it?
I saw and not being a aficionado of rap,
yeah.
I didn't know that he had died.
Wow.
And I was far enough away, my wife and I both saw it, and honest to God, we thought it was a real person.
A real person, yeah. And they've now done this with Michael Jackson. They've also done it in Japan. They're doing it with live people, where they actually do holographic concerts, and they're making millions and millions of dollars. People are paying top dollar to go to concerts to see a hologram instead of an actual person. So it's pretty well developed, you know, the way it looks, yeah.
They're going to do true Frank's Island, like this.
They're doing what?
Frank's Island.
Oh.
Family.
Okay.
This is touring next year.
Yeah, and it's interesting, if anybody watched the Super Bowl last year at halftime and they had the Prince big hologram come out and sing, which was very controversial. We'll talk in just a minute, because there's the issue of consent. You know, does the dead person have the ability to consent to this?
That was an issue with Forrest Gump also. A lot of people were bothered about his interaction with historic figures.
Oh, interesting. And those people can't consent to do that. Whoops. So this is that facial recognition software and then the speech recognition software. It's pretty well developed. And then this is my last video clip that I'll show you, because this has implications not only for bereavement, but for fake news, because you can take any person, if you have a little video, and you can recreate their voice and their facial patterns. And I'll tell you, it's still a little off, but it's still kind of creepy if you watch this. So this is, if we could get on the fake news one, and you'll see. Yeah, just click that. Not wanting to go. Anyway, what they've done is they have used that facial recognition software, the voice recognition. There's a person next to him. Okay.
It's been formatted to fit this screen, and it never happened.
On the back end now of my presidency, now that it's almost completed, although there are all kinds of issues that I care about, the single most important thing I can do is play golf, because our parties have moved further and further apart, and it's harder and harder to find common ground. So, you know, when I said in 2004 that there were no red states or blue states in the United States of America, I was wrong.
And you see how it's a little off, but that's going to improve. Yeah.
Presidency now is almost complete, although there are all kinds of issues that I care about.
Sorry, you can stop.
The single most important thing I can do is play golf.
Okay, so we'll go to the next slide. And I want to start with kind of what you could see as being the benefits of this sort of technology in terms of grief work. And so we'll stay with that first, and then we'll talk about the shadow side. So take about 1 minute at your tables to talk about what you think some of the benefits could be. How could we use this? what you were talking about. What does this bring up for you in terms of possible benefits? I heard the first one was money, which I'm sure is very involved with all this. Right now it costs $70,000 to try to make one of these of your loved one. Did you want to add?
Yeah, so I thought about my nephew who lost his mother when he was 4 years old and doesn't have much memory of her. Now he's 13. Would he want to have some kind of conversation with her?
Right, right. Yeah, and that someone said to me, you know, some people can read books and imagine things, but other people need to see the movie. Like, some people need the visual piece to actually relate to it. And would that be a gift maybe for that boy, for that young man? Kate, did you have something you wanted to add? No? Anybody? Chelsea in the back. Or go ahead.
Well,
yeah.
We were just talking about it. It's a demonstration of how this technology, like many others, can be used for good or evil.
And we're going to get to the bad part in just a second, so please hold on to that. Let's just talk right now about what might be useful about this, because people are going, this is happening. It's going to happen. It'll get cheaper. It'll get better. Brian? No?
I had things about that, but serious.
Okay. Chelsea, you want to add something?
Well, sure. I mean, it might be borderline concern, but when is it not enough? Like seeing your mom or seeing the visual or whoever the person X is, eventually I don't think it's enough. Like it's almost kind of on repeat unless it's so sophisticated the algorithms are changing like the clip you showed.
Right.
But I would worry about it being somewhat empty in the end.
And the interesting part, though, with the AI is that it was supposed to be learning and adapting, so it can actually respond to new questions and stimuli.
Based
Dave?
on what point in the person's life. My grandfather had developed Alzheimer's, and if that was the
what they used,
kickoff point for the AI software, it wouldn't have meant
much
anything.
Right.
And a little earlier, when his faculty started to go and his inhibitions started to go, he could have ended up saying some.
Sure, and we're actually getting into the negative again. Yeah. So I'm gonna stop. And we'll talk about that. Let me get Dave, and then I'll get you.
So I was thinking after seeing this of a project where, as the project ends or the product ends, the project team gets terminated. And so there's this knowledge base that could be brought back. Something that was developed.
Yeah, sure.
So why did you make that design decision?
Right. So it's like bringing back a burned down library. Got it. Okay. Other positives. Brian's got some there in the back. Past that.
I was thinking in the domain of education.
Okay.
So I think there's been the digital Socrates sort of. Everyone would have their own individualized tutor, but if you could have something that's like a very much an embodied, like visual that can engage in real time. I think we're very social learners, so more than just like a touch screen, something like this can be very engaging.
Yeah, for sure. So Teddy Roosevelt comes and gives a lecture on.
We're seeing fifth generation, your fifth generation of where your family's coming from.
Sure. So it could help you with your own history and your ancestry and getting to know those people and understanding better about who you are and why you're the way you are. Johannes, did you want to add? Or nope, you're just holding it? Scott.
So is the benefit potentially actually working on the creation of the image of the person as opposed to the end result?
Interesting.
In other words, my mother was like this.
Right.
As opposed to having it just sort of pop up suddenly. It's somebody else.
Right.
It's based on what stage in their life.
Right.
What stage in their life and what goes into the database.
Right. And so what you're getting at is story making and bereavement, and that's what we do. That's the gathering of the bones. We basically make stories about our lost loved one, and it isn't even necessarily based on a historical person. It's based on our feeling or perception of that person. So if me and my brother were to describe our younger brother, you wouldn't even know that we were describing the same person in some ways, because we're all in our own projections about his identity, and we all have a unique dynamic going on. So maybe it could help with the storytelling, because you've got to put it together and give them information. What else might be good? Yeah, in the back, and then we'll go over here to Michelle.
Well, we were talking over here about if it was someone, maybe more of a casual relationship that you had with them, maybe they were funny. You like to hang out with them.
Right.
Or even I was just thinking, like, if it was someone that you knew, maybe not really well, you could have a time limit, like, so you wouldn't get too in depth and realize.
Yeah.
You just talk to them for a little bit and get memory.
So much of a relationship is about, like, you triggered this in me. You triggered the funny side of me, or the part of me that feels comfortable, or the part of me that is analytical. And I love having you in relation to me to remind me of that, right?
Yeah, or like, you know, you get ready to use a big presentation, so you can do it. Right. Yeah, you know it's not
right. So encouragement, yeah.
I can do it.
Yeah. And then Michelle was way over here. Having a little integrity problem with the. Someone needs to sing over it.
I was just thinking it'd be interesting because you can really preserve a moment in history, and that's kind of a unique thing to it. That instead of just having like for example, the Tupac image. Here's an entertainer at his prime at this moment, and you can recreate everything that really signifies what that culture was going through at that time.
Right.
So much the voice, the presentation of what he was doing.
Right.
It embodies that moment in history.
Right. So right now I'm working with A&E on a documentary where they're actually using holographic messages from the dead. They're tracing 4 terminally ill patients, but the patients themselves created the messages to be delivered after death, and the person who died consents, plus the person who's receiving the message consents. And so the only one that's actually died and that I've seen was a woman who was in her 30s, died of breast cancer. They had a 7-year-old daughter. So she left a message for him after about 3 months and said, meet me at this bench where we kissed first. And he decides whether he wants to do that or not. And he goes and he sits down on this bench, and literally the full figure of a holographic image of his wife pops up next to him, and she says to him, I realize I never taught you how to braid our daughter's hair. And then a holographic image of the little girl shows up, and she sits there and she says, first you divide it in 3, then you take these, and she really likes it when you do this. And now that to me is a little different, because it's almost like a souped up video, because she made it and she left it. It's like a letter. But this stuff is a little different because it's the AI component of it. It's interactive, so it's not the historical person.
Yeah. Could just as easily be presented singing in the rain.
Yeah, sure.
You know, how would the viewer know unless the idea of having permission granted by the person being depicted.
Right.
Seems essential.
Gets rough, yeah.
Yeah, otherwise, you know, it really depends. AI doesn't solve everything. It's whoever builds the system and determines what data goes into it. Right. Adrian, did you want to stay on the positive side? We're just about to go to the discussions on the negative. All right, so let's hold. So let's hold that, because right now I'd like to just have you talk a little about what are your concerns? What are you worried about with this? And just take a minute to do that, and we'll bring it back. And we're doing well with.
right, if you could finish up your thought. I'm up? Okay. So I'm going to bring us back. One other thing that wasn't mentioned in our prose was I actually presented this in Portugal at the International Conference of Death and Dying, and they were overwhelmingly positive and excited about the therapeutic effects that you could, they're using virtual reality. Say you were sexually abused by someone, you could sit across from them and you could actually confront them and they would seem like a real interaction, and they felt like that would be a very powerful way to work through some issues. That being said, let's talk about the shadows. Go ahead, John.
I just came up. This is the perfect opportunity for Christ to come back, the second coming, and could be used for very nefarious purposes, in my mind. Hey, forget the televangelists. This could be the ultimate deal.
Yeah.
So, hey, the faithful go to heaven, all the rest of us will sayonara.
Yeah, there's certainly a potential for misuse. Dick? We'll have Kate and then Dick.
Our society is so consumed with not dying, not aging.
Right.
This seems to me another drug.
Yeah.
I don't have to face the death of my fill in the blank, my mother, my spouse, my son, my nephew. I can recreate them.
That's right. So it's the ultimate in our death-denying culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or if grief never gets resolved, we talk about unresolved grief. It lies within us, and you never grieve the death of your spouse because you have this AI fake thing. Suddenly you lose your dog, and you can't function in society anymore because you've never resolved that grief. You've adopted this drug, this crutch, and you've never faced the reality that you've lived through a loss, and in order to continue to live in this very real life body, you need to grieve. You need to experience pain. You need to cry. You need to tell the stories. You need to be able to walk through that path of grief, and this seems like it's denying it.
Okay. Somebody else? Liz has something back there, and Dick wanted to say something. Oh, go ahead.
I got it.
Yeah, you stole it.
Yeah, I grabbed the mic. It's mine. Going back to the example you gave from the conference in Portugal, that could go horribly, horribly wrong.
Sure.
If the person across the table wasn't remorseful.
Right, right. So imagine you go up to your father and you say, I was really, really hurt by this. And he looks right at you and he says, well, suck wind. Because that's what he would say. Is that helpful? Maybe. Maybe you would remember that. Maybe it would help because you wouldn't idealize the dead. You would remember who they really were.
The example you gave,
no, I'm with you. Yeah.
It could do so much more damage.
Sure, yeah. Liz?
So this kind of goes along with what you were saying, that there's a process, that whole building up of the bones and everything, and another way to let it go. That at what point does this get let go? Right? I mean, we have a lot of addictive personalities, especially when it comes to technology.
Right.
And like, if you think about some movies where a spouse loses, a husband loses his wife, and then you see him like having conversations with her, and at first kind of being skeptical of it, and then eventually like seeking it out, and then all of a sudden it's not there. It's like he's grown to the point where he was able to let it go. But if you can always go there.
Right. So can you imagine I lose my husband, I go out on a date, and I come home and I call up a holographic image of my husband and I say, what do you think of him? Like, that'd be different, right?
Right. And then the other part we talked about was that it seems that the AI piece of it would allow you to at some point realize that you can manipulate it.
Oh, interesting.
And start twisting it and changing it, and now you're really going off and away from reality.
Dick, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I think building a little bit on what Rob said, but what we talked about some was as part of the grieving process over time, your memories change a little bit. and you tend to remember the good parts, you know, looking at the past through rose-colored glasses. And this will mellow and maybe, you know, sort of build up actually your memory and your love for the one who's gone. If you have this holograph recreating it exactly, you can't do that.
Interesting. So here's one of my concerns, like you're pointing out very well, is when we keep them historically who they are and we don't allow them to move, we unconsciously don't give ourselves permission to move. And you know, that moment in bereavement when you realize your loved one has a destiny beyond your tears, and that you allow them to move or change, even if it's in your imagination or your dreams, is the moment that you're unconsciously giving yourself permission to change. And so it's almost like being stuck in the static past, which is, you said beautifully, I think. Adrian, did you want to add?
Yeah, and I was just...
Wait for the mic here.
Yeah, I was just more concerned about the artificial intelligence, you know, and
in general,
it being able to be manipulated for bad purposes.
Yeah, there's definitely that potential.
Because, I mean, artificial intelligence, if you can put a personality in it, then it basically becomes a living being of its own. And if you design it to be bad, then,
right,
you know, what do we have?
Right. I mean, the whole fake news piece is a whole different thing, too. We could recreate history. We could have... Yeah. Right. Right.
Well, I sort of see two technologies that are almost on a collision course. And one is this technology that is getting more and more accurate. But the other one is the Ray Kurzweil kind of technology that says we're going to reach some point that we could actually take our brain and put it into a computer and we'll live forever. And so it sort of eliminates the whole problem of grieving because people don't die. So within the next 50 years, certainly, why both of these technologies will really be at a high rate.
Sure.
Infinitely, there's also a Black Mirror episode about that.
Oh, is there? Okay.
San Bernardino.
Okay, we'll have to take a look at that. Other comments? When you think about technology mediating our most intimate relationships, I mean, even something as simple as Facebook, which I spend way too much time on. I have a friend who it was his 50th birthday, and he said, hey, I love this. You know, I got 380 happy birthdays on my Facebook. I want to go to Sierraville Hot Springs. I want to eat at Los Tres Hombres there in Sierraville. Who's with me? Nobody. Nobody. And so it's that, and I'm just setting that up as, I see it with my students where it's like I can play 1,800 hours of EverQuest and get to the top level, but I don't know how to ask the girl next to me to hang out. Even something as simple as, you know, when I wanted my favorite banana cream pie recipe, I always knew to call my Aunt Barbara because she was so wonderful with banana cream pie. So I call her, she teaches me. We now have social reciprocity. I owe her something. She feels valued. But what do I do now? I type it in, and I get 15 million recipes for banana cream pie. I do think this is going to be happening. I think it's a matter of how we ethically try to control it or get ahead of it. The difficulty with it is there isn't testing. Nobody's thinking about the social or relational implications. Nobody thought of that when they thought of the iPhone either. This is just a grand experiment that's happening right in front of us in terms of our most intimate relationships. It's funny, the other part of this talk was actually on sex bot technology, but it was a G-rated audience, and I was told I could not speak about sex bots here. So anyway, the good, the bad, the ugly. I'll end with a quote, Robert Frost. And there's one question or comment from a person online, so let's just take that before I do the last quote.
So Scott online is asking, what happens about cybersecurity? What stops someone from hijacking you and becoming your hologram and doing evil?
Good point, Scott. I don't know. Wow. So my ending quote is from Robert Frost. It's, we dance around in a ring and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows. I enjoy being part of that dance. The mystery is still in the middle, and it's up to us to decide how to ethically go forward to look at that mystery. So thanks for all your willingness to talk and look at this issue from both sides. It's been a fun night. Thanks.
Minutes left for questions. If anyone has any.
1 minute
left for questions. So any last thoughts? All right, we'll go ahead and call it an evening then. Kim, if you have a minute, we'd love to stick around for a few minutes to answer any questions that people don't feel comfortable asking in front of everyone. Exactly, definitely. And we thank you very much for coming tonight, and thank everyone here for coming tonight. We really appreciate everyone's support and having you come out and watch on the live stream and help us out with these events. Thank you.